Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to Hilaal. I would say jazakallah at you for staying with us. I'd like to thank my colleague Lukman Shadrack for carrying you through that first hour of the show. Now, City Press at the weekend reported that a senior executive at Eskom allegedly offered a hitman 400,000 rand to assassinate a middle manager who had exposed looting operations by organized crime syndicates. The hit was reportedly ordered on Dorothy Mmushi, who is a middle manager in the state-owned power utilities forensic department, who had at the time reported a chain of illicit activities to the South African Police Service. It now begs the question of really, are whistleblowers being protected in this country, or are their pleas turning on deaf ears? Joining me now, I'd like to welcome John Clarke from Whistleblowers for Change. Mr. Clarke, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live.
Yeah, thank you so much, Raz. Yeah, glad to be back.
No, it's an absolute pleasure having you back here. As the caption says there in the bottom, Mr. Clarke, are whistleblowers' pleas turning on deaf ears?
Well, yes, they are. Well, not deaf ears in the sense that people do have the auditory capacity to hear them. It's willful deafness. It's because there is still, in a sense, a criminal element for whom whistleblowing would be very bad for business. And I'm really concerned that they have their tentacles and their influence in all places, still holding hostage, the country hostage. So it's a case of people in power with authority who are in these positions of leadership are actually fundamentally being undermined and held hostage. So, and I think that's for me the big concern, is that it would be very easy to deal with the corruption problem in this country if whistleblowers were genuinely protected. As international best practice has shown that that is the best way to deal, particularly with financial crimes. And, you know, we've seen one after the other, people coming in. And we've seen what happens to whistleblowers when they blow the whistle is that they suffer then escalating retaliation. And I mean, we're still seeing this with, you know, Martha Ngoyi and Tiro Hilaal at PRASA. And, initially I was viewing it with utter dismay and saying, what on earth? Until a friend of mine who's done a great deep study in terms of international best practice eventually pointed out to me that we are still at the mercy of what she called a thugocratic regime or machine, a sort of a horizontalized sort of set of network of people that basically hold every institution of state that would be able to turn things around by the short hairs. Let's use that nice polite term, because they don't want to see whistleblower. They don't want that. I mean, it's be bad for business.
Mr. Clarke, yesterday I was listening on radio. Godfrey Lebeya, the head of Hawks, was being interviewed, and the question was posed to him: what are you, as a law enforcement authority, doing to protect whistleblowers? The answer seemed so lukewarm. If these authorities are not doing anything to protect whistleblowers, who is going to?
Well, the media. I mean, the fact that you're phoning me is an encouragement. I want to also just commend, those who do take a stand, and it's thanks to the media that they have some sense of, at least that they'll be protected by the public consciousness of what's happening. And Dorothy Mmushi, I'm just looking at the interview with her. I mean, she's a remarkable woman. All I would want to say is that, in the long arm of history, it will eventually, the thugs and the people that do not follow the truth will eventually, history will get the better of them. It's a question of how much the resilience that ordinary whistleblowers need to have. Very important that they have support systems, very important that they think it through, that they talk to somebody that they can really have confidence in, to actually think through the issue, because, I mean, I don't like to say this, but my default guidance to whistleblowers that come to me for help is to say, with a smile on my face, say to them, don't worry, it's only going to get worse. At least they know I'm being honest with them. but it needs to know that, well, how do we ensure that you have the resilience that when things do get worse, that you can keep going? Because ultimately, if you just outlast, then you will eventually come right. If you think of that whole Survivor series, they talked about outwitting, outplaying, and outlasting. We need to have good lawyers. We've got a lot of intelligent and genius in this country. We've got good journalists and people like yourself who can help outwit and outplay. The question is outlasting it. And that, for me, is why there needs to be solidarity formed between people that stand for truth and justice, who will then basically put it to these folks that, look, go somewhere else. You're not going to get what you want here. And I think particularly I'm concerned with Eskom because, I mean, Eskom was such an excellent utility. And eventually, at the initial stage, I thought, how could we have allowed this to go to ruin? It was precisely because it was so good at what it did in the early stages. In terms of helping the transition from the old to the new South Africa, Eskom played a vital institutional support role. And because it was so good, the thugs realized tactically and strategically they needed to take control of it if they wanted to get their way. And I would just hope that we'd have some really good thinking through the strategies that are available to us. As far as, the Hawks and General Abiers, I mean, I get stories every day from people who phone me up and say, the police not doing their jobs. Not just not doing their job, actively involved and complicit with criminal syndicates. In the Western Cape, just yesterday, somebody was telling me about somebody was going to try and sell their car on the internet. Suddenly somebody comes, and it was a whole scam and a setup with the police collaborating with them. And I said, well, have you reported it to, IPID and all the rest? He said, no, we don't know what to do. We've reported to the police, but the police are not going to investigate themselves. And I think for me, structurally, there's got to be independence for IPID has to, because at the moment, IPID and SAPS report to the Minister of Police. So there's just a conflict of interest right there, a structural problem. And and people then just don't have confidence in reporting it to the authorities because of that structural thing. That needs to get sorted out. And I really can't understand why Cyril Ramaphosa is not actually tackling it. He just appoints another minister for this, another minister for that. You don't need another minister. You just need to actually have a proper structural solution. But I don't want to alienate anybody in this thing. We need to find goodwill across the board and be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. We need to have empathy and compassion, not jumping to conclusions too quickly as to who really are the villains. Allow the people to reveal themselves by building relationships, by actually seeking discernment as to what's really going on. And my experience has been that somehow there's this mysterious spiritual process that eventually emerges to give people the confidence and the resilience to be able to cope, in the face of all this terrible stuff. But I mean, we are, I believe, going to pull through this because we've got a Bill of Rights and we've got a Constitution which entrenches freedom. Now you just got to use that freedom in a responsible way, not to kind of self-indulgent looting. That's unfortunately what people have interpreted freedom has been.
Mr. Clarke, one final question. Papita Deokaran, it's 2 years now, obviously, since she was tragically murdered. The leaders haven't learned from this, have they? They seem to be reiterating the same call, protect the whistleblowers, but there's always a reactive or a knee-jerk reaction to everything that they do. Are they waiting for the next whistleblower to be unfortunately killed in order for them to change things? It seems to be looking that way, doesn't it?
Well, I don't even think that will happen. There will be more deaths. It will escalate, and things will become more and more violent, more and more kind of polarized. And what I'm trying to, explore ways of how do we steer things away from the increasing polarization and mutual and scapegoating and projection and instead of people saying, okay, let's take responsibility. Let me do a thorough examination of my own conscience. What am I doing in my own life that I can be true to myself, true to the reality that I'm in, and a humble servant of the truth. And I mean, I've been a social worker for 40 years. I was just sadly mourning the death of one of my very clients from 20 years ago, who on the Kolobeni mining conflict was co-opted and basically manipulated into playing a corrupt role within the BEE partner there. He eventually realized this was a scam, a swindle, and he resigned and he blew the whistle. And for 15 years, that school that he was the school principal of has continued to flourish because he took a stand. So I've seen these examples of people. I'm just mourning the fact that he's now passed on, but I'm just celebrating the fact that there was a whole generation of young students who learned from his example. His name was Mr. Sipho Msabane. And there are these role models we need to find and emulate. And that's what I do on my YouTube channel. I find people that really have got a story to tell. Because, you know, there's a lovely saying which somebody says, it's common to oppose a truth, but it's impossible to resist a story. So I'm wanting to just see the story play out of people that have taken a stand and to make sure that if they need support, you know, there are people like myself, Whistleblower House, to support them through that dark night process of doubt, you know, because they have made the right stand, and it will actually eventually things will turn around, because crime does not pay. I mean, that cliche that you use, and eventually the system will run so dry that will be nothing left for anybody, let alone the criminals, and they'll go somewhere else. But Mr. I don't Clarke, know. I wish I had an easier answer for you, but I just want to say strength to what you guys are doing, because we have to use the media at every opportunity.
Definitely, I couldn't agree more with you there. Our role to try and at least help bring truth and justice to our country. Mr. Clarke, I wish we had more time to continue the conversation, but I'd like to thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal Live.
Great, go well.
That's John Clarke, Whistleblowers for Change, talking to us about, of course, Dorothy Mmushi, strength to her and her family. Of course, it's a difficult time for them right now, and we hope that that she's kept safe during these difficult moments, and that corruption and any sort of ill crimes within our country is taken care of. After the break, I'll be speaking to Dion Joubert. He is from the Citrus Farmers Organization of Southern Africa. We're going to be talking about the EU having concern with regards to the exporting of fruit here from South Africa. Do stay tuned.